Makari Gasaway was sentenced to 50 years in prison for shooting and killing Rushan.
In today's world, where technology connects us like never before, a young woman named Shawmayne McClam embarked on a journey many of us can relate to, a search for love and connection. But this isn't just another tale of modern romance. It's a chilling reminder of how quickly hope can turn into horror. Imagine logging onto your favorite dating app, swiping through profiles, reading messages from strangers who seem kind, intriguing, maybe even promising. For Shawmayne McClam, a bright, vivacious 27-year-old transgender woman, that moment came one fateful evening when she matched with someone online, a man named Marie Gasaway. Little did she know, her decision to meet him would lead to a nightmarish chain of events that ended not only her life, but also shattered her family forever. This is not just a story about a tragic death. It's a deep dive into the darker corners of human nature, the risks faced by marginalized communities, and the systemic failures that allow such tragedies to occur. It's about the hopes we carry, the dangers lurking beneath the surface of seemingly harmless interactions, and the devastating consequences when those dangers come to light. As you listen to this account, ask yourself, could this have happened to me? To someone I care about? And most importantly, what can we do to prevent it from happening again? Shawmayne McClam was more than just a name or a statistic. She was a beacon of resilience, a fighter who had overcome countless obstacles to live authentically as herself. Her smile lit up rooms, her laughter brought joy to those around her, and her dreams inspired everyone fortunate enough to know her. Yet despite all her strength and courage, she became another victim of the violence that disproportionately targets transgender individuals, especially women of color in our society. What follows is a harrowing exploration of what happened that night, why it happened, and what it means for all of us. This is the heartbreaking case of Shawmayne McClam, a woman whose life was brutally cut short because of hatred, ignorance, and the dangers inherent in seeking love in the digital age. Buckle up, because this story will take you on an emotional roller coaster, leaving you questioning everything you thought you knew about safety, identity, and humanity itself. Welcome to Fatal Fame, where all our stories are based on true crimes. Please support us by subscribing to this channel and clicking the notification bell icon so you don't miss any of our latest stories. Let's start at the beginning. Shawmayne McClam grew up in a world that often felt hostile to people like her. From a young age, she knew she was different. Society didn't always make room for her, but she refused to shrink herself to fit into boxes others created. She embraced her identity fully, becoming a proud member of the LGBTQ community. Friends describe her as someone who radiated positivity, always striving to make the world a better place. She loved music, fashion, and spending time with her family. She dreamed of opening her own boutique someday, a place where everyone would feel welcome, regardless of who they were. But living authentically as a transgender woman came with challenges. Shawmayne faced discrimination at work, judgmental stares in public spaces, and even hostility from strangers. Despite these hardships, she remained optimistic. She believed in love, in connection, in the possibility of finding someone who would see her for who she truly was, not just as a transgender woman, but as a human being full of dreams and aspiration. So, like millions of others, she turned to online dating, hoping to find companionship and acceptance. Online dating apps promised something magical, the ability to connect with people beyond geographical boundaries, to meet someone who might truly understand you. For Shawmayne, this promise was intoxicating. Each swipe felt like a step closer to finding that special someone. When she matched with Marie Gasaway, she must have felt a flicker of excitement. Here was someone who seemed interested in getting to know her. His profile picture showed a smiling face, His messages were polite and friendly. He seemed normal, approachable, maybe even kind. But what happens when the person behind the screen isn't who they appear to be? What happens when the facade crumbles, revealing something far darker? On June 21st, 2022, the quiet streets of Gulfport, Mississippi, bore witness to a tragedy that would shock not only the local community, but also the nation. That night, Shawmayne McClam's apartment transformed from a place of warmth and family into a scene of unimaginable violence. According to police reports, Shawmayne, a 27-year-old transgender woman, was fatally shot multiple times during a violent confrontation with Mary Gassaway, a 22-year-old man she had recently met online. The details are gut-wrenching. Shawmayne wasn't alone that night. Her sister, mother, brother, and 2 young children were present, turning what should have been a peaceful evening into a living nightmare. Witnesses recounted how a heated argument between Shawmayne and Gassaway escalated rapidly, culminating in Gassaway drawing a gun and opening fire without hesitation. Shawmayne died instantly, while her sister sustained critical injuries and was rushed to the hospital, fighting for her life. The rest of the family, though physically unharmed, were left traumatized, their lives irrevocably altered by the senseless act of violence they witnessed. For Shawmayne's loved ones, the grief was overwhelming. They lost not just a daughter, sister, and aunt, but a vibrant soul full of dreams and aspirations. Her mother described her as someone who radiated positivity, always striving to make the world a better place. "She was my heart," her mother said during an emotional interview after the trial. "And now there's a hole in my chest that will never heal." But this wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a societal failure. Shawmayne's death highlighted the ongoing issue of discrimination and violence faced by the transgender community, particularly in intimate or online settings where initial conflicts can spiral out of control. It served as a grim reminder that for transgender individuals, the pursuit of love and acceptance often comes at a perilous cost. As investigators pieced together the events leading up to the shooting, questions arose. What drove Marie Gassaway to commit such a heinous act? Was it premeditated, or did something trigger him in the heat of the moment? And perhaps most hauntingly, could this tragedy have been prevented? To understand the gravity of what happened that night, we need to examine the broader context. Violence against transgender individuals is not a new phenomenon. According to studies, transgender people are nearly 4 times more likely than their cisgender peers to experience violence or harassment when dating online. These numbers represent real lives, real people who deserve to live free from fear and harm. Yet, despite growing awareness of these issues, little has changed to protect vulnerable communities like Shawmayne's. That night, Shawmayne's family gathered in her apartment, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. Perhaps they were watching TV, sharing stories, or simply enjoying each other's company. Then Marie arrived. At first, things may have seemed normal. Maybe they exchanged pleasantries, laughed, or talked about their interests. But soon, tensions began to rise. What started as a casual conversation turned into a heated argument. Witnesses reported hearing shouting, then the unmistakable sound of gunfire. When police arrived on the scene, they found Shawmayne lying motionless, her life stolen in an instant. Her sister, critically injured, was rushed to the hospital. Family members stood frozen in shock, unable to process the brutality of what had just occurred. The apartment, once filled with laughter and warmth, now bore the scars of unimaginable violence. As detectives began their investigation, they uncovered disturbing patterns in Marie Gassaway's behavior. While outwardly calm, Marie had a history of erratic actions and unresolved anger. Friends and acquaintances described him as someone who could be both charming and volatile, depending on the situation. But no one could have predicted the extent of his rage, or the deadly consequences it would have. This part of the story raises important questions about accountability. How did Marie slip through the cracks? Why weren't there systems in place to prevent this tragedy? And what lessons can we learn to ensure that no one else suffers the same fate as Shawmayne? Online dating has changed the way people meet and connect. For many, it's a place full of hope, a chance to find love, friendship, or companionship. But for transgender individuals like Shawmayne McClam, online dating can be a double-edged sword. While it offers opportunities to connect, it also comes with risks that others may never fully understand. Imagine being transgender and using a dating app. Every message you send, every profile you look at, carries a question. Is this person safe? Will they accept me for who I am, or will they judge me, harass me, or worse? These are questions many transgender people face every time they log on. It's not just about finding someone, it's about staying safe while doing it. Studies show that transgender people are nearly 4 times more likely than cisgender people to experience violence or harassment when dating online. That's a huge difference. Behind every profile picture and friendly message, there could be hidden biases or even dangers. For Shawmayne, this invisible risk became devastatingly real. When Shawmayne connected with Mary Gassaway online, she probably felt the same mix of excitement and nervousness that anyone feels when meeting someone new. She might have hoped he'd be different, someone who would truly see her for who she was. But as we know now, things didn't go as planned. Her story reminds us how risky online spaces can be for transgender individuals. So, what can be done to make online dating safer? Some tips include meeting in public places, sharing your location with friends, and taking things slowly. But is that enough? In a world where just being yourself can put you at risk, these precautions might not feel like much protection. Real change needs to come from the platforms themselves, and from society as a whole. What do you think? How can we make online spaces safer for everyone, especially marginalized communities like transgender people? Share your thoughts below. Let's keep this conversation going so no one else has to face what Shawmayne did. Mary Gassaway wasn't just a name in the headlines. He was a man whose actions left an indelible mark on Shawmayne McClam's family, her community, and the broader conversation about violence against transgender individuals. To understand what drove him to commit such a heinous act, we need to piece together fragments of his past, his personality, and the societal factors that shaped him. At just 22 years old, Marie seemed like any other young man navigating adulthood. He had friends, acquaintances, and perhaps even dreams for his future. On the surface, there was nothing particularly alarming about him. His online dating profile likely portrayed him as approachable, friendly, and open to meeting new people. But beneath this carefully crafted image lay shadows, hints of anger, unresolved emotions, and behaviors that some who knew him described as unpredictable. Friends and family members who were interviewed during the investigation painted a picture of someone who could be both charming and volatile. Some recalled moments when Mary seemed kind, even empathetic, while others remembered instances where his temper flared unexpectedly. These inconsistencies made it hard to pin down exactly who Mary Gassaway was. Was he simply a product of his environment, shaped by circumstances beyond his control, or was there something darker lurking within him, waiting for the right trigger to unleash itself? One of the most striking aspects of Marie's behavior was his ability to compartmentalize his emotions. Those who interacted with him regularly described him as quiet, reserved, and sometimes distant. It was as if he carried a wall around him, shielding his true feelings from those closest to him. This emotional detachment became evident during the police interrogation after his arrest. Detectives noted how calm and composed he seemed, almost too calm given the gravity of the situation. There were moments when his demeanor shifted, his jaw tightening, his eyes flickering. But these changes were fleeting, quickly masked by a stoic expression. What drove Marie to react so violently upon discovering Shawmayne's gender identity? The prosecution argued that his actions stemmed from deep-seated biases and prejudices, possibly fueled by societal stigma surrounding transgender individuals. However, the defense attempted to frame his reaction as impulsive, suggesting that fear or confusion played a role in his decision to pull the trigger. While these explanations offer partial insights, they fail to fully capture the complexity of Marie's motivations. To truly understand Marie Gassaway, we must consider the broader context of his life. Growing up in a world rife with inequality, discrimination, and toxic masculinity, young men like Marie often internalize harmful beliefs about gender roles and identity. For some, these beliefs manifest as aggression or hostility toward those who challenge traditional norms. In Marie's case, encountering a transgender woman like Shawmayne may have triggered feelings of discomfort or insecurity, which he then channeled into violence. But let's pause for a moment and reflect. How much responsibility should we place on individuals versus society when examining cases like this? While Marie Gassaway made the conscious choice to commit a violent act, it's impossible to ignore the systemic issues that contribute to such tragedies. Misinformation, lack of education, and pervasive stereotypes about transgender people create fertile ground for hatred and violence to take root. Without addressing these root causes, we risk perpetuating cycles of harm that disproportionately affect marginalized communities, like Shawmayne's. As investigators continued to probe Marie's background, they discovered troubling patterns. Reports indicated that he had been involved in minor altercations in the past, arguments that escalated unnecessarily, misunderstandings that turned hostile. While none of these incidents rose to the level of criminal charges, they provided glimpses into a personality prone to impulsivity and rage. Another critical aspect of Marie's story is his use of social media. In today's digital age, platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter serve as extensions of our identities, offering windows into how we present ourselves to the world. Investigators scoured Marie's accounts, looking for clues that might explain his mindset leading up to the shooting. What they found was telling. Shortly before meeting Shawmayne, Marie had deleted several posts and messages, seemingly attempting to erase traces of their interaction. This deliberate effort to cover his tracks raised questions about whether he had premeditated the attack or acted out of panic after realizing Shawmayne's identity. Despite these revelations, many questions remain unanswered. Did Marie harbor latent biases against transgender people, or was his reaction purely situational? Was he aware of the impact his actions would have, or did he act in a moment of blind fury? And perhaps most importantly, could this tragedy have been prevented if someone had intervened earlier? The truth is, we may never fully know what went through Marie Gassaway's mind that night. Human behavior is inherently complex, shaped by countless variables that defy easy explanation. What we do know is that his choices had devastating consequences, not only for Shawmayne McClam and her family, but also for the wider community grappling with the implications of this case. So, what lessons can we draw from Marie's story? First and foremost, it underscores the importance of accountability, not just for individuals, but for the systems that enable such violence to occur. Online dating companies must prioritize inclusivity and safety by implementing better verification processes, stricter reporting mechanisms, and educational resources to combat bias and promote understanding. They must also hold users accountable for discriminatory behavior, ensuring that transgender individuals feel secure when using their services. Secondly, Marie's case highlights the urgent need for education and awareness. Many cisgender individuals enter online spaces without understanding the unique challenges faced by transgender people. By promoting empathy, respect, and acceptance, we can begin to dismantle the barriers that lead to discrimination and violence. Finally, this story serves as a sobering reminder of the power of choice. Every action we take, or fail to take, has ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves. For Marie Gassaway, one fateful decision ended a life and shattered countless others. For the rest of us, the challenge lies in learning from this tragedy and working collectively to prevent similar outcomes in the future. The hunt for Marie Gassaway became a race against time. After the shooting, he vanished into the night, leaving behind a scene of devastation that would haunt Shawmayne McClam's family forever. For law enforcement, capturing him quickly wasn't just about bringing a suspect to justice. It was about preventing further harm and understanding what had driven him to commit such a heinous act. But as investigators combed through evidence and pieced together witness statements, one question loomed large. Where was Marie hiding, and why? Gassaway's disappearance wasn't entirely unexpected. In cases like this, suspects often flee in panic or attempt to cover their tracks. What surprised investigators, however, was how methodical his actions seemed. Within hours of the shooting, Marie began deleting his social media accounts, erasing messages and cutting off communication with anyone who might have known about his involvement. It was as if he were trying to erase himself from existence, hoping to disappear before authorities could close in. But in today's digital age, few can truly vanish without a trace. Investigators meticulously analyzed security footage from nearby businesses, tracking movements that matched descriptions provided by witnesses. They also scoured Marie's online activity, uncovering fragments of conversations and connections that pointed toward his possible whereabouts. Friends, acquaintances, and even casual contacts were questioned, each providing small but crucial pieces of the puzzle. Then came the breakthrough. A credible tip-off placed Marie at a convenience store near the crime scene. Surveillance cameras confirmed his presence, capturing grainy images of a man matching his description, purchasing items shortly after the shooting. With this new lead, police mobilized swiftly, surrounding the area and preparing for a potential confrontation. Remarkably, when officers finally located Marie, he offered no resistance. He was taken into custody quietly, almost as if he had been expecting it all along. The arrest marked the beginning of another critical phase: interrogation. Detectives knew they needed answers, not just to understand what had happened that night, but to uncover the motivations behind Marie's violent outburst. Inside the sterile confines of the interrogation room, Marie sat calmly, his demeanor giving no indication of the storm that was about to unfold. To the untrained eye, he might have appeared remorseful or even cooperative, but those who observed him closely noticed something unsettling. A coldness in his eyes, a lack of emotion that suggested he was disconnected from the gravity of his action. Detectives approached the interrogation strategically, presenting facts and evidence to break down any defenses Marie might have constructed. Witnesses had already identified him as the shooter, and ballistics tests confirmed that the weapon recovered during the investigation matched the bullets fired at Shawmayne and her sister. There was no escaping the truth. Yet despite the overwhelming evidence, Marie remained evasive, offering vague and rehearsed responses to every question. "Why did you do it?" one detective asked, leaning forward across the table. "What made you pull the trigger?" Marie hesitated, his lips pressing into a thin line. For a moment it seemed as though he might open up, reveal some hidden motive or explain the rage that had consumed him. Instead, he shrugged, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I don't know," he said. "It just happened." This response frustrated investigators, who sensed there was more beneath the surface. Was Marie genuinely struggling to articulate his feelings, or was he deliberately withholding information? His detachment raised suspicions. It was as if he viewed the entire situation as an abstract concept, something separate from the real-world consequences of his actions. This psychological distance made it difficult for detectives to gauge whether he felt any remorse, or if he even understood the magnitude of what he had done. As the hours ticked by, the tension in the room grew palpable. Detectives shifted tactics, appealing to Marie's emotions and attempting to humanize the victims. They spoke about Shawmayne, her dreams, her resilience, her love for her family, and the impact her death had on those left behind. They described her sister's fight for survival, the trauma endured by her young nieces and nephews, and the grief that now defined her mother's life. Did any of this resonate with Marie? Did he feel guilt, shame, or regret? Or was he too lost in his own emotions, or lack thereof, to acknowledge the carnage he had caused? Despite their efforts, Marie's answers remained frustratingly elusive. He admitted to owning the firearm and meeting Shawmayne through an online dating platform, but he offered little insight into his mindset leading up to the shooting. When pressed about his reaction upon discovering Shawmayne's gender identity, he claimed confusion and fear, suggesting that these emotions had overwhelmed him. However, his tone lacked conviction, raising doubts about the authenticity of his explanation. By the end of the interrogation, detectives were left with more questions than answers. While they had secured a confession of sorts, Marie's motives remained shrouded in mystery. Was this a premeditated act fueled by prejudice, or had something triggered him in the heat of the moment? And perhaps most troublingly, was there something deeper, a darker aspect of his personality that had yet to be uncovered? The arrest and interrogation of Marie Gassaway highlighted the complexities of investigating crimes rooted in bias and hatred. On the surface, his actions appeared impulsive, driven by fear or misunderstanding. Yet, the calculated steps he took to evade capture suggested a level of forethought that contradicted this narrative. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors faced the daunting task of unraveling these contradictions and presenting a clear picture of what had truly transpired that fateful night. For Shawmayne's family, the arrest brought a mix of relief and anguish. Knowing that Marie was in custody provided a sense of closure, but it did little to ease the pain of losing someone so dear. Her mother, in particular, grappled with conflicting emotions. She wanted answers, justice for her daughter, but she also recognized the limitations of the legal system. No verdict could bring Shawmayne back, nor could it undo the trauma inflicted on her surviving loved ones. As we reflect on this chapter of the story, let us consider the broader implications of Marie's actions. His behavior underscores the urgent need for greater accountability, not just for individuals like him, but for the systems that enable such violence to occur. Online dating platforms promise connection and companionship, yet they often fail to provide adequate safeguards for vulnerable users. Transgender individuals like Shawmayne are forced to navigate a digital landscape riddled with risks, where every interaction carries the potential for harm. While individual responsibility plays a role, systemic failures cannot be ignored. Companies that profit from these platforms must prioritize safety, implementing measures to prevent harassment, discrimination, and violence. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think drove Marie Gassaway to commit such a horrific act? Do you believe his interrogation revealed the full extent of his motives, or is there still something he's hiding? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue exploring the lessons we can learn from this tragedy. The trial of Marie Gassaway was a pivotal moment for Shawmayne McClam's family and the broader community. It wasn't just about deciding guilt or innocence. It was about understanding what had driven someone to commit such a horrific act. For Shawmayne's loved ones, it was also a chance to seek some form of closure after losing someone so dear. As the prosecution laid out its case, they painted a grim picture of violence and senselessness. They argued that Marie's actions were premeditated, fueled by prejudice and hatred toward transgender individuals. Evidence presented included witness statements, forensic reports, and surveillance footage, all pointing to Marie as the perpetrator. Ballistics tests confirmed that the bullets recovered from Shawmayne's body matched the firearm found in Marie's possession after his arrest. There was no denying the physical evidence. The question now was motive. The prosecution called several witnesses to testify, including Shawmayne's surviving sister, who recounted the harrowing events of that night. Her voice trembled as she described hearing the gunshots, seeing her sister fall, and feeling the searing pain of being shot herself. She spoke of the fear that gripped her as she realized Marie was still in the apartment, the uncertainty of whether she would survive. Her testimony brought tears to the eyes of many in the courtroom, underscoring the devastating impact of Marie's actions on an entire family. Other witnesses included friends and acquaintances of both Shawmayne and Marie. Some described Shawmayne as a beacon of hope and resilience, someone who inspired others with her courage to live authentically despite societal challenges. Others shared their impressions of Marie, describing him as quiet, reserved, and sometimes unpredictable. These contrasting portraits highlighted the complexity of the case, how two lives, seemingly ordinary on the surface, had collided in such a catastrophic way. On the other side, Marie's defense team attempted to craft a narrative that portrayed him as a victim of circumstance. They hinted at past trauma, psychological distress, and even fear as potential explanations for his violent outbursts. They suggested that Marie had acted impulsively, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't control. However, this strategy struggled to gain traction, especially given the cold-blooded nature of the crime. Witnesses noted that Marie showed little emotion during the trial, his demeanor remaining stoic even as gut-wrenching details emerged. One of the most poignant moments came when Shawmayne's mother took the stand. Her grief was palpable, her words cutting through the sterile atmosphere of the courtroom like a knife. "Shawmayne was my heart," she said, her voice breaking. "She was my light, my joy. And now there's a hole in my chest that will never heal." She described Shawmayne as someone who had overcome countless obstacles to live her truth, someone who deserved to be remembered, not as a victim, but as a human being full of dreams and aspirations. Her testimony resonated deeply with those present, reminding everyone of the humanity behind the headlines. For Shawmayne's family, the trial was a painful yet necessary process. It forced them to relive the worst night of their lives, to confront the reality of her absence every time they entered the courtroom. But it also offered a chance for closure, a way to hold Marie accountable for his actions and ensure that her story wouldn't fade into obscurity. Still, the verdict, when it finally came, left mixed feelings. While Marie was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison, with 30 years to be served without parole, the emotional scars remained. No amount of punishment could bring Shawmayne back, nor could it undo the trauma inflicted on her surviving loved ones. District Attorney Billy W. Parker emphasized the significance of the verdict, praising the efforts of the Gulfport Police Department in bringing the perpetrator to justice. "This is not just a victory for Shawmayne's family," he said during a press conference following the trial. "It's a victory for everyone who believes in fairness, equality, and the right to live free from fear." Yet, even as he spoke, it was clear that the case represented more than just legal proceedings. It symbolized a larger fight against systemic issues that continue to endanger marginalized communities. Beyond the courtroom, the trial sparked conversations about the need for greater protections for transgender individuals, particularly in online spaces. Activists pointed out that while the legal system played a crucial role in holding perpetrators accountable, true change required societal shifts. Online dating platforms, for example, must implement stricter measures to prevent harassment, discrimination, and violence. This includes better verification processes, improved reporting mechanisms, and educational resources to combat bias and promote inclusivity. As the dust settled, one question lingered. What lessons would society take away from Shawmayne's story? Would her death serve as a catalyst for meaningful reform, or would it become another statistic in a growing list of tragedies? The answers depended on collective action, from lawmakers enacting stronger protections to everyday citizens, challenging their own biases and advocating for change. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe the justice system adequately addressed the complexities of this case? What steps do you think should be taken to prevent similar tragedies in the future? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue working toward a safer, more equitable world for everyone. Shawmayne McClam's tragic death didn't just affect her family. It sent shockwaves through her community and the broader LGBTQ population. Her murder became a rallying cry for change, sparking conversations about how society can better protect transgender individuals, especially in online spaces. As news of the shooting spread, vigils were organized, and people from all walks of life came together to honor her memory. These gatherings weren't just memorials. They were protests, highlighting the urgent need for societal reform. Local activists played a pivotal role in channeling the grief and anger into action. They emphasized that while the legal system had brought Marie Gassaway to justice, true progress required more than courtroom verdicts. It demanded a collective effort to address the root causes of violence against transgender individuals: stigma, discrimination, and lack of protection in spaces where they should feel safe. For many, Shawmayne's story underscored the harsh reality that transgender people face daily risks, even in seemingly harmless situations like meeting someone through an online dating app. One of the most poignant moments came during a candlelight vigil held in Shawmayne's honor. Friends, family members, and allies gathered to share stories about her life, celebrating the person she was rather than focusing solely on how she died. Her mother delivered a heartfelt speech, urging attendees to remember Shawmayne not as a victim but as a beacon of hope, a woman who had overcome countless obstacles to live authentically and inspire others. "She wasn't just my daughter," she said, tears streaming down her face. "She was a fighter, a dreamer, and a light in this world. And now it's up to us to carry that light forward." This sentiment resonated deeply with those present, sparking conversations about what could be done to prevent similar tragedies. Activists pointed out that while awareness campaigns and educational initiatives are crucial, they must be accompanied by tangible actions. Online dating platforms, for example, bear significant responsibility for ensuring user safety. Many advocates called for stricter verification processes, improved reporting mechanisms, and educational resources to combat bias and harassment. Some even suggested implementing AI-driven systems to flag potentially harmful behavior before it escalates. Beyond digital spaces, the conversation extended to communities, workplaces, schools, and other environments where transgender individuals interact with society. Advocates argued that fostering inclusivity and acceptance starts with education, teaching people to challenge their biases, recognize privilege, and stand up against discrimination. Schools, in particular, were identified as critical battlegrounds for shaping future attitudes. By incorporating comprehensive sex education and discussions about gender identity into curricula, educators can help dismantle stereotypes and promote empathy from a young age. Legislation also emerged as a key area of focus. While some states have enacted laws to protect transgender rights, enforcement remains inconsistent and many regions lack adequate legal safeguards altogether. Activists urged lawmakers to prioritize policies that address violence against transgender individuals, including harsher penalties for hate crimes and increased funding for support services. Additionally, they called for greater accountability within law enforcement agencies, citing numerous instances where police mishandled cases involving transgender victims. As these discussions unfolded, one recurring theme stood out: the importance of allyship. Allies, cisgender individuals committed to supporting the transgender community, have a vital role to play in driving change. This includes amplifying transgender voices, advocating for inclusive policies, and standing up against acts of discrimination or violence. During one panel discussion hosted by a local advocacy group, a transgender activist emphasized this point. "We can't do this alone. We can't do this alone. We need allies who will listen, learn, and act alongside us. Together, we can create a world where everyone feels safe and valued. For Shawmayne's family, seeing the outpouring of support provided some measure of comfort. Knowing that her death had sparked meaningful dialogue gave them hope that her legacy would endure. However, they also recognized the limitations of relying solely on grassroots efforts. Real change requires systemic reform. Reforms that hold institutions accountable, protect vulnerable communities, and ensure equal treatment under the law. Now, I want to hear from you. How do you think society can better protect transgender individuals, especially in online spaces? What steps can we take to foster greater understanding and acceptance? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's work together to honor Shawmayne's memory by pushing for meaningful change. Shawmayne McClam's tragic death is not an isolated incident. It's part of a much larger pattern of violence and discrimination faced by transgender individuals, particularly transgender women of color. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the systemic issues that perpetuate this violence. It also challenges us to ask difficult questions. Why does society continue to fail its most vulnerable members? What can we do to create a safer, more equitable world for everyone? The statistics surrounding violence against transgender people are staggering. According to a 2023 report from the Human Rights Campaign, at least 40 transgender or gender non-conforming individuals were killed in the United States in 2022 alone. Many of these victims were young. More than half were under the age of 30. These numbers represent lives cut short, dreams unfulfilled, and families left to grieve. But beyond the raw data lies a deeper, more painful reality. Each victim was someone's child, sibling, friend, or partner. They were human beings with hopes, fears, and aspirations. For transgender women of color, the risks are even greater. Studies show that they are disproportionately targeted by violence, often facing intersecting forms of discrimination based on their race, gender identity, and socioeconomic status. This intersectionality creates a perfect storm of vulnerability, leaving them exposed to harm in ways that others may never experience. Shawmayne's case underscores this harsh truth. She wasn't just a victim of violence. She was a victim of societal neglect, bias, and systemic inequality. One of the most alarming aspects of this epidemic is how frequently these crimes go unreported or unpunished. Law enforcement agencies often mishandle cases involving transgender victims, failing to investigate thoroughly or dismissing the significance of the crime. In some instances, media coverage perpetuates harmful stereotypes, reducing victims to their gender identity rather than portraying them as whole individuals. This lack of accountability sends a dangerous message that the lives of transgender people are expendable. But the problem extends far beyond law enforcement and media representation. It begins with societal attitudes, the biases, prejudices, and stigmas that shape how people view and treat transgender individuals. For many, ignorance fuels fear, which in turn leads to hostility and violence. Transgender people are often dehumanized, seen as other rather than as equals deserving of respect and dignity. This dehumanization makes it easier for perpetrators like Mary Gassaway to justify their actions, whether consciously or unconsciously. Online spaces, including dating apps, have become breeding grounds for this kind of behavior. While these platforms promise connection and companionship, they often expose transgender users to harassment, rejection, and even physical danger. Misinformation and misunderstanding run rampant, creating environments where bias thrives. For example, some cisgender users fetishize transgender individuals, reducing them to objects of curiosity rather than seeing them as human beings. Others react with hostility upon discovering someone's gender identity, leading to verbal abuse, threats, or worse. The psychological toll of navigating such hostile environments cannot be overstated. Transgender individuals face higher rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation due to the constant stress of discrimination and stigma. The fear of rejection or violence looms large, making it difficult to trust others or feel safe in social interactions. For Shawmayne, this fear became a devastating reality, a reminder that for many transgender people, simply existing can be an act of courage. So, what can be done to address these systemic issues? The answer lies in collective action from individuals, institutions, and governments alike. First and foremost, we must prioritize education and awareness. Schools, workplaces, and communities must implement programs that challenge bias and promote understanding of transgender issues. By fostering empathy and acceptance, we can begin to dismantle the prejudices that fuel violence. Secondly, online platforms must take responsibility for protecting their users. Dating apps, in particular, have a duty to ensure the safety of marginalized groups like transgender individuals. This includes implementing better verification processes, stricter reporting mechanisms, and educational resources to combat bias and harassment. Companies that profit from these platforms must be held accountable for the harm caused when they fail to act. Legislation also plays a crucial role in driving change. Stronger laws are needed to protect transgender individuals from discrimination and violence, both online and offline. Law enforcement agencies must receive training to handle cases involving transgender victims with sensitivity and competence. Additionally, funding should be allocated to support services for survivors of violence, ensuring they have access to resources like counseling, legal aid, and safe housing. Finally, advocacy must extend beyond policy changes to cultural shifts. We must amplify transgender voices, centering their experiences and perspectives in conversations about safety and equality. Allies, cisgender individuals, committed to supporting the transgender community, have a vital role to play in this effort. This includes standing up against acts of discrimination, advocating for inclusive policies, and using privilege to uplift marginalized voices. Now, I want to hear from you. How do you think society can better protect transgender individuals, especially in online spaces? What steps can we take to foster greater understanding and acceptance? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's work together to honor Shawmayne's memory by pushing for meaningful change. As we come to the end of Shawmayne McClam's story, one thing becomes crystal clear. Her life mattered. She wasn't just a name or a statistic. She was a beacon of hope, resilience, and love. A woman who dared to live authentically despite the obstacles placed in her path. Her death is a tragedy, but her legacy is a call to action. It reminds us that we have a responsibility to fight for a world where no one has to fear for their life simply because of who they are. Reflecting on Shawmayne's journey, we see a woman who overcame countless challenges to embrace her true self. She faced discrimination at work, judgmental stares, in public spaces, and even hostility from strangers. Yet she refused to shrink herself to fit into boxes created by others. Instead, she stood tall, radiating positivity and inspiring those around her. Her courage serves as a powerful reminder that authenticity is worth fighting for, even in the face of adversity. But Shawmayne's story also highlights the urgent need for change. Violence against transgender individuals is not inevitable. It is a product of societal failures. It stems from ignorance, bias, and systemic inequality, all of which can be addressed through collective action. Each of us has a role to play in creating a safer, more inclusive world, whether it's educating ourselves about transgender issues, challenging discriminatory behavior, or advocating for policy changes. Every step counts. For Shawmayne's family, the pain of losing her will never fully heal. They lost not just a daughter, sister, and aunt, but a vibrant soul full of dreams and aspirations. Her mother described her as someone who radiated positivity, always striving to make the world a better place. "She was my heart," her mother said during an emotional interview after the trial. "And now there's a hole in my chest that will never heal." These words resonate deeply, reminding us of the profound impact one life can have, and the devastating void left behind when that life is taken too soon. In honoring Shawmayne's memory, we must commit to doing better. We must listen to the voices of transgender individuals, amplifying their stories and advocating for their rights. We must hold institutions accountable, demanding safer online spaces and stronger legal protections. And we must challenge ourselves to confront our own biases, recognizing that change starts within. As we close this chapter, I urge you to reflect on what you've learned from Shawmayne's story. How will you contribute to creating a world where everyone feels safe, valued, and respected? Will you educate yourself and others about transgender issues? Will you stand up against acts of discrimination or violence? Or will you use your platform to raise awareness and drive change? Let's honor Shawmayne McClam not just by remembering her name, but by continuing to fight for the values she embodied: love, acceptance, and the fundamental right of every person to live without fear. Together, we can build a future where tragedies like hers become a thing of the past. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this story impactful, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with others. Raising awareness is the first step toward real change. Let's keep Shawmayne's memory alive and ensure that her death was not in vain. Shawmayne McClam's story doesn't end here. It lives on in the actions we take, moving forward. Every time we speak up against injustice, advocate for inclusivity, or support marginalized communities, we honor her memory. The question now is, what will you do next? Will you educate yourself about the challenges faced by transgender individuals? Will you push for safer online spaces and stricter accountability for platforms that fail to protect users? Or will you simply start by having conversations with friends, family, and colleagues about the importance of acceptance and respect? The power to create change lies in all of us. Together, we can ensure that no one else suffers the same fate as Shawmayne. Let's work toward a world where everyone, regardless of their gender identity, can live freely, safely, and authentically. Now, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What steps will you take to make a difference? Let's continue this conversation and push for meaningful change. Because honoring Shawmayne's memory isn't just about remembering her. It's about ensuring that her legacy inspires a brighter, safer future for everyone. If Shawmayne McClam's story touched your heart and opened your eyes to the challenges faced by the transgender community, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. By doing so, you'll help us continue sharing important stories that raise awareness and drive change. But don't stop there. Share her story with others. The more people who hear about Shawmayne's life and the systemic issues she represents, the closer we get to creating a safer, more inclusive world for everyone. Let's honor Shawmayne's memory by spreading her story far and wide. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you for your support.